Welcome back, everybody. My name is Tim. This is another Real Ideal Gear Review, and today we're talking about watches for graduates, whether it be high school or college. This is just an exciting time of year, and there's nothing that really lasts the lifetime or long periods of time, decades, more than a watch gifted at graduation. I remember my graduation from high school and the few degrees that I gotten from college, and it's just one of those things that there's just nothing quite like a graduation. And to tie in a watch with a gift like that at graduation time, I think is just an outstanding idea. However, I think there's a lot of things to consider as we go through this. So I'm going to put my glasses on. I've got a whole bunch of notes, so forgive me if I'm looking up and down at the camera in my notes. But I think there's some important things to consider before you go out and buy a watch for a graduate, or if you have a watch that you're going to give to a graduate, or if you have a few watches to choose from. Maybe you're gifting a watch that's from your collection, which I think is a great idea because it shows kind of a personal gift from yourself to someone else. And so I think that's another nice touch. But we're going to go through a whole list of things to consider. So the goal here is about memory making and just kind of impacting the watch gift with the moment of graduation and vice versa. The moment of graduation is impacted by this watch gift. And the giving part of it, I think, is also a part of this. It's something that you do in person. Try to do it as much as you can in person. Have a video conference. Call them on the phone if it's being mailed in. Something to just make that memory really last. But really, this is about attaching the memory to the watch and the watch to the memory. It's a great relationship, and it makes the watch more of a gift that will last a lifetime. The wearability of the watch, the form and the function of the watch. Both of these things are going to play a role. Sometimes the function overtakes the form a little bit. Sometimes the form overtakes the function a little bit. And so when you're looking at a watch to gift to a graduate, you really have to kind of balance that whole thing out. And part of that has to do with the personality of the graduate themselves. Is this person kind of an outdoors person? Are they really hands-on? They like to do a lot of the work with their hands. Are they more of an office type? Are they more of a reader, kind of a library type, academic? And that kind of influences the kind of watch that you're going to give as far as form and function, how to balance both of those. Sometimes you have a graduate who's just completely nerding out and they just love all kinds of gadgets and information that they can get from their watch. And certainly the smartwatch is its own category, and the gift of a smartwatch can be great. But keep in mind that a smartwatch has firmware updates, and over a period of time, they're going to be gone and they're going to be done with, and you have to have the latest model. But when you give a mechanical watch or even a quartz watch, there's just something about it that just makes it kind of a timeless gift that you hang on to, kind of an heirloom of sorts. So when we look at these things, we're looking at form and function. And I think there's a balance in there for most people, and you just have to keep this in the back of your mind as far as like, what is it that really kind of speaks to the graduate as best you can. And it's a gift, and remember, it's a gift from you to them. There's going to be a little bit of you in this gift that they get, and so they're going to remember you as a part of this gift. So don't avoid the fact that there are certain things that you prefer, that you like, or that you know about a watch that may be, of interest. And that little flavor can also be, I think, a part of the gift as well. Certainly it's about the graduate, so don't let yourself get too absorbed in this and giving a gift of a watch that you want to have. But make sure that it is a gift that fits their personality and fits who they are as a graduate. At opposite ends of this form and function spectrum really are dress watches, dress mechanical watches, or dress automatic mechanical watches. And at the opposite end of that is going to be your Casio watch. Really, the function just takes over on a Casio watch. You've got all kinds of different things that these watches can do. They're run off a Quartz Movement, a battery. They typically are a resin case, a plastic or rubber strap that goes with the watch. And at the other end, you have the dress watch. Again, you're going to have just a watch that doesn't have much utility as far as that goes. It's really a dress watch. It might be a watch that you wear for formal occasions, formal interviews. If you have a really, a upper level administrative type job that you're looking forward to, this might be more of the dress watch category. So these are kind of the opposite ends of the spectrum. And in between these two categories, these two styles of watches, is pretty much going to be everything else. And so we're going to get into that and talk a little bit about this entire spectrum in brief form. I'm going to fly through this as quickly as I can. Any watches that I show on here, almost all, but I think one, have been reviewed. So check out my video playlist for any of the watches that you want to get more information on. But I will try to get the model number in there and maybe a little bit of the information depending on how long I talk about this particular watch when I'm going through and editing the video. So part of that is going to be the uniqueness of the watch. Really, this should probably be more of a high priority when it comes to giving a gift like this, is that you're looking for something that has kind of a unique personal flair for the graduate themselves. And so taking the time to kind of look out there for different style watches, different options, different things about the watch that separate itself from kind of the typical watch. This is where I think smartwatches are all kind of a dime a dozen. Yeah, you can program all kinds of different things, but they all have basically the same shape. They have basically a black screen most of the time until you wake them up. This is where the personality of a watch, I think, really comes through. So take the time, look for something that's unique, look for something that has the functions or the form that you're looking for, that helps the graduate with the next stage of their life. Maybe they're looking for a job, so it's going to be job interviews. Maybe they're going from high school into college. Maybe they're going from high school to a trade school. Maybe they're going from high school to homemaker. And so just keeping all of that in mind as far as how you approach the uniqueness of the watch and the next stage of life, the anticipated next stage of life for the graduate. We're looking for watches that are low maintenance, low cost. And there's a whole list of things to consider when it comes to keeping a watch low maintenance, because when you're gifting a watch to a new graduate from high school or a new graduate from college, they're typically not flush with money. And so looking for something that's easy to maintain, something that is easy to take care of, and also highly durable, which is part of the maintenance, is a great combination for them and for their sake. So some of the things to look for is a sapphire crystal. And the crystal is the glass piece that you're looking through to look at the display or to look at the dial. A ceramic bezel if you're looking at dive watches or any kind of watch that has information that goes around the outside of the dial. You're going to want to look for something that has a more durable material to it. Ceramic is at the top of the list when it comes to scratch resistance. So take a look for a ceramic bezel, in particular for dive watches. 100 meters of water resistance will keep just about any activity in check. You're not going to run the risk really of water intrusion into the case, whether it be a Casio watch, whether it be a dive watch or a field watch, anything like that. And even a dress watch. If you have a dress watch that has 100 meters of water resistance, that's a great low maintenance characteristic for that watch. An adjustable clasp and strap or strap. So when it comes to a dive watch, in particular anything with a bracelet, you're going to want something that has an adjustable clasp to it. Something that you can adjust, whether it's through pins that you move back and forth on the clasp. Some of them now have a sliding diver's clasp where you can move internally while the watch is even on your wrist and adjust the watch tightness or looseness while it's on the wrist. And of course the strap, you have all the different holes that go with the pin and buckle, and so something like that I think is very helpful, because when you're wearing the watch, different activities, your wrist will swell, your wrist will constrict, depending on the weather, depending on how much activity you're involved with. So those are things to consider when it comes to the adjustability of the strap or bracelet. Now, this is not something that's real common, but it is becoming more apparent that some companies are looking to add hardness coatings to their cases. And the hardness coating is what prevents or limits the amount of significant scratches or even micro scratches on a case to kind of preserve the newness of the case itself. So if you have a choice between a watch that has a hardness coating on it versus a watch that doesn't have a hardness coating on it, the hardness coating is a legitimately good quality to have for a watch 9 times out of 10. So depending on the company, which again 9 times out of 10, it's going to be a legitimate coating, and I would go for it if there's ever an opportunity to add a hardness coating to a case. If you're looking at a quartz watch, which is a battery-powered watch, having any kind of quartz movement that has as close to 10-year battery life as you can would be great. Casio's, I'm going to use Casio's as the example. There's Timex, there's a bunch of other companies that are out there, but Casio's has a really good selection of 10-year battery watches. Even better is the tough solar battery watches. Those run off the power of the sun, and so really you don't have to worry about those batteries for at least a decade, sometimes 15 years before you have to change out basically the storage battery for the solar power. So anytime you get a quartz watch, check the life of the battery and see how long that battery is going to last. Sometimes those watches have been on the shelf for a period of a year, maybe 2, if it's not a real popular watch. So keep that in mind. You may get a watch that the battery is going to go dead fairly soon if it's a battery that only lasts 2 or 3 years. years. So a 10-year battery really has a long longevity to it. You're not going to have a lot of maintenance for at least 6, 7, 8 years. And I think that's a great gift, a great idea to keep the maintenance as low as possible. Last but not least, when it comes to mechanical movements, whether they're automatic or manual wind, is try to avoid the in-house movements if you're looking for low maintenance, especially if there's going to have to be any kind of maintenance on the movement itself on a 2 to 3 year period, as far as lubrication, that kind of just general maintenance to a mechanical movement. When you get into an in-house movement, it has a really high price tag when it comes down to the overall maintenance fees that are associated with it. But if you stick to something that has really popular movements like the Miyota movement or the Seiko movements, you're going to have a much, much lower maintenance fee associated with that. Now, let's get into some of the ideas around fitting the personality of the graduate themselves. And I have 8 categories here that we're going to go through. The first category is going to be for the traveler graduate, the person who loves to travel, who wants to travel. Maybe they're going to be traveling overseas for whatever the work might be, whether it's studies, that kind of thing. A GMT movement is great. You can keep track of 2 different time zones on that watch. And of course, dual time on a Quartz digital display. You have 2 different time zones that you can keep track of as well. So anything like that, I think, would be a great gift for a graduate. You're talking about any kind of GMT movement that's out there, a Seiko NH34 movement. You have the Miyota 9075 movements. Those are the movements associated with it. So if you see those numbers, those are going to be numbers that associate themselves with a GMT movement. Now on the digital side, you're going to be looking for anything with world time or dual time as part of their functions. Casios are great for this, and there's a whole slew of micro brands and even major brands like Seiko and Citizen that will have dual time or GMT type movements. Next up are dive watches. Dive watches are one of the more popular style watches that are out there. They're very rugged looking. They're very durable. They often have the great water resistance, so there's no worry about water intrusion, things like that. And frankly, they're pretty shock resistant as well. If you stay within like the Seiko NH35 movements, the NH36 or the NH38 movements, all of those movements are really great. Solid movements, very popular, very low cost to maintain. But a dive watch is a fantastic watch design, very comfortable to wear. Typically it has a timing bezel. You can turn that bezel on the top and keep track of when you started, and the minute hand or the hour hand, either one, will tell you where you've ended up and the elapsed time that's gone by. So the dive watch really is a very versatile style watch. Oftentimes they'll have a date window, not have a date window. Sometimes they'll have a dive watch with a GMT movement, so you get the best of both worlds in that case. Oftentimes that's the case. But dive watches, I think, are a really good option for the graduate as far as the versatility that you can wear it. You can wear it for casual occasions. You can wear it for even semi-formal occasions. So long as it's not maybe really highly colorful, the semi-formal, I think, would work. But they are very versatile for all kinds of different opportunities, job interviews, things like that. The chronograph. This is kind of your gadget-minded person. This is also someone who might be a cook, might be an EMT, as far as timing heart rhythm or heart rates, breathing rates, those kind of things. It's an automatic, like I can start and stop. I can keep track of things. I don't have to wait for the minute hand to get to, or the second hand to get to a certain position before I start counting. Also someone who just loves watches, because if you love chronographs, you're kind of into watches now. So if you have a person who's really into watches, this might be the next step as far as the kind of watch that you get. Now, mechanical movements for chronographs are going to be more expensive than the quartz movements. So if you're looking to save some money or to keep things low cost, you're probably going to have to go with a quartz movement. A lot of mecha quartz movements are really great because they don't have that annoying 1 tick per second movement. Oftentimes you get multiple ticks within a second, so it looks more like an automatic watch. An automatic movement, they're great, but they're often bulky and heavier. So keep that in mind when it comes down to just the size and also the maintenance and durability that goes along with it, because a quartz chronograph movement is going to be much more or much less prone to issues than you will have with a chronograph mechanical movement. Just more moving parts in a mechanical movement. Next up is the sport watch. This is probably the best combination between the dress watch and the dive watch is the sport watch. And the sport watch does a lot of great things. The sport watch really highlights kind of the sportiness. You have that high water resistance. You usually have 100 meters of water resistance or better, but it's also sportier looking. It's more sleek looking. It's not as bulky as a dive watch. You typically don't have a timing bezel on the top. You have kind of just a regular plain, maybe polished bezel that kind of goes around, dresses it up a little bit. But a sport watch really does a great job of kind of mixing between those two lines, and also allows you, again, to wear it for casual reasons all the way up even into formal reasons, depending on the style of the sport watch. Also with a sport watch, you're going to have great lume. I didn't mention this with a dive watch, but the dive watches have great lume. That's part of the DNA of a dive watch, is the great lume. You move into sport watches, pretty good lume. You move into dress watches, sometimes they don't even have lume. So that's also a spectrum when it comes down to the luminosity of the hour markers, of the minute hand, the hour hand, those kind of things. So keep that in mind, that a sport watch is kind of in that middle ground between the dive watch and the dress watch. Next up is the dress watch. Now the dress watch really is kind of a niche type watch. It is a watch that you would wear more specifically for your administrative, professional, full-on dress type occasions where you're dressing out for whether it be a date, whether it be just a high-class occasion, something that you're really going to dress up. The dress watch is also typically more sensitive to scratches, more sensitive to kind of impacts, those kind of things. Typically the water resistance is lower. So if you have someone who's very active, the dress watch probably is not a good match for that person. If the person you're gifting this to is an academic, office type, they do a lot of formal occasions, this might be more of the watch that suits their needs in particular. It's also a watch that has a lot of flair and personality to it. So when you get a dress watch, there's all kinds of different styles and unique things that get put into a dress watch that don't necessarily get put into a sport watch or into a dive watch. Although that's changing a little bit, but the dress watch really is the king of that kind of idea. So a dress watch, great for all kinds of different like formal occasions, not so much the casual or the work setting. Now the Field and Pilot watch is one of my favorite style watches because they're so simple to look at, especially the Field watches. And the Pilot watches have a lot of history behind them, and they can be more complex if they have the slide rules that are integrated into the dial. But most often, these are highly legible watches with great handsets, great lume, very minimal things going on the dial, very easy to read, and just great looking simple watches overall. So if you're looking for a watch that just kind of is very simple, and typically they have pretty good water resistance, 50 meters of water resistance or better, you're going to get a watch that I think is also durable when it comes to water resistance, when it comes down to just wearability. The height off the wrist is generally lower. It's not as high off the wrist as a dive watch might be. A dive watch, because of all the stuff that it has going on there and the high water resistance, tends to be a chunkier looking watch, whereas the Field watch is a little bit closer to the wrist, kind of like a dress watch would be as well. Last but not least are Casios. Casios are kind of a category all of themselves. They just envelop so much time and energy when it comes to a conversation like this, but just even the sheer volume of Casios that are out there. There are literally thousands of Casios that have been made over the decades since Casio has really become popularized from the G-Shock. So let's start with the G-Shock. The G-Shock is typically a watch that has what's called the 310s, 10 bar or 100 meters of water resistance, 10-year battery, and then also a 10-meter drop, and survives a 10-meter drop so that it doesn't break. So that's kind of the triple 10. Now, the G-Shock has evolved even more from that, and typically they're 200 meters of water resistance with the 10-meter drop and then also the 10-year battery. So the G-Shock shape, there's all kinds of different forms and functions. You have the Casio, which is kind of that refined G-Shock look. You have the square, which is the historical G-Shock of all time probably, that goes back to the mid-80s. You also have all the Mudmaster, you have the Rangemaster, which are kind of your big military, chunkier looking Casio G-Shocks that are out there. And you have some smaller G-Shocks out there, the baby G-Shocks. There's just all kinds of G-Shock options that are out there. Some things to keep in mind though is atomic timekeeping is often a function that I think is helpful for graduates. It keeps the maintenance low. By just having the watch on or on a windowsill at night, the watch will update itself to the most accurate time. Tough solar is another characteristic that I think is really important for Casios. When it comes to low maintenance, tough solar is that solar charging that keeps the battery running and keeps it full just about under any lighting conditions. So even under incandescent indoor lights, it is going to absorb light and transfer that into energy and put that into the battery. So tough solar is a great option for a Casio watch. And then you have all the different functions that are typically associated with a digital watch. Those are stopwatch, timer, alarm, dual time or world time, and a whole slew of other things that happen with a digital watch that Casio in particular is really good about. But those are the basic functions that I think you'd really want to have. And again, a Casio really fits a person who's very active, wants the simple things, doesn't really care too much about the refining look of a watch, or maybe they just love the look of Casios, which there are a number of people, including myself, that just love the classic Casio look. But those functions I think are really emblematic of a good Casio watch. Hard to avoid them. But there are some things about these functions that I think can be even more amped up, like for instance, programmable alarms, where you can program the alarm to go off on a specific date, a specific day of the month, or all the days within a month, those kind of things, or daily alarms. You have the timer function, which you can program down to the minute, all the way up to 24 hours away. Stopwatch functions, where you have multiple laps that if you have a person who's very much into running, especially running intervals, you have somebody who can time their intervals by using different lap functions that are on the stopwatch. And of course, the world time or dual time, whichever one, they're basically the same thing, but that's another general function. Then there's the whole category of outdoor watches, which has what's called the ABCs, altimeter, barometer, and compass. And when you get into the Pathfinder series, you have those functions in there. You also have the tough solar. You also have the atomic timekeeping. You can have just about everything on a watch like that. And it's just very fun to use. That's one of the watches that I have is a Pathfinder with all of those functions. It's a great outdoor watch. There are Casios that are thin and small, like you have the F201. You also have the W217. These are very low profile, very low cost watches, especially if you're traveling overseas and it's kind of a sketchy area that you're going into as far as maybe people stealing things off of you, off your person. Wearing a Casio watch like this is kind of a deterrent. It kind of communicates the message that don't have a lot of resources here. We're just kind of traveling on a shoestring budget. So that's something to keep in mind. But also you have the watches that are gargantuan. You have the Big Sky, the 736, the W736, or you have the GD350. It's a G-Shock. These are very thick watches, and they're thick for a reason because the profile of the case extends above the crystal to protect the crystal from different scratches and different things that it may bump into. So that's where some of that chunkiness comes into, as far as also like the shock resistance and also the water resistance. Those all play a role into the case design and how chunky the watch may look and how thin the watch may look. So Casios have a whole slew of options. I think Casios are one of the great gifts for anybody who's budget-minded, or if the graduate loves Casios, you really can't get enough Casios, and they're probably going to let you know which ones they like anyway. So Casios are a great option. So when we're looking, there are also different kinds of movements to consider. You have automatic mechanical movements. You have manual wind mechanical movements. You have quartz movements, which are run off of battery power, and also kinetic movements, which has the movement basically of an automatic movement, but stores that energy in a battery that runs as a quartz movement. So it's kind of this hybrid between automatic and quartz movements. Each of these movements offered some different personalities, some different things for the wearer to think about. And as far as a collection goes, this is kind of that starting to split the hairs a little bit finer for anybody who's interested, any graduate who's interested in collecting watches. Even the type of movement might be a consideration for that graduate as far as getting them a different style movement. Vintage watches do require a little more attention as far as who you're buying it from, making sure that you get some video of the watch running, and then also just kind of the brand that you're buying. You know, it's a brand known for durability, long-lasting, good movements that are on the inside. But vintage watches can also provide this flair, this different kind of view of a watch that when it comes to graduation, it's very unique. Vintage watches tend to be less popular watches. One example that I have is the Glycine vacuum watch. It is a watch that is vacuum sealed. It's also a watch that has a great history behind it, the Glycine Airman, all kinds of different things that go on with that company. And so vintage watches can really provide another flair, a different kind of look into watches themselves. One other category that I think is interesting are the watches that have kind of a famous history to them that are on the cheaper side of the wallet. And some of those include the Timex Ironman being worn by President Clinton. You have the Casio Square, which was worn by astronauts in outer space. You also have the Casio DW290, worn by Tom Cruise in the Mission Impossible movies. You had the Casio CA53, worn by Michael J. Fox in Back to the Future. You also had the Seiko Arnie watch being worn by Arnold Schwarzenegger in a couple of movies. You had him in Predator and also in Commando. And then, of course, you have the TV show Tom Selleck wearing the Momentum Quartz Movement in the TV show Magnum P.I. So a bunch of different watches that have kind of that history behind it that you could also incorporate into the gift that I think would be an interesting little twist to whatever watch that you give your graduate. When we're looking at gifts for graduates and we're looking at watches, there's all kinds of options that are out there, things to consider, things that you should look out for, things to just kind of inject some of the care and some of the thought into the gift to the graduate. So I hope this video has been helpful to you. Put the comments down below. What do you think of this video? What are some of the things that you would add to this list of considerations for other people to consider that I may have missed? And also check out my webpage, realidealgear.com, for all kinds of watches for sale, including limited edition watches, Casio watches, and some outdoor gear as well. So my name is Tim. This has been another Real Ideal Gear review. We'll catch you guys next time.